Welcome to Just Minding My Business Media. I'm your host, Ida Crawford, and today we're going to be talking about cybersecurity. I know all of y'all are sick of the forecasts about this company's been hacked, that company's been hacked, and today we have Saaim Khan, who has over 2 decades in IT and cybersecurity and has a rich background in technology consulting and software development, leading to his role as the founder and principal consultant at Cyber Matters and Jumpstart Security. Known for blending business acumen with technical expertise, Saaim offers comprehensive strategic solutions to clients worldwide. His certifications include CISM and ISO 2, 27001. Okay, you're going to tell us what that is, along with degrees in software engineering and project management. Saaim is committed to advancing cybersecurity knowledge and collaboration. Oh, you are so welcome today, Saaim, because I know, like everybody else in the world, all of our information is out there. Everybody's information is out there. You can't help it. And a lot of times, no matter what you do in your environments, it's the companies that you touch or that touch you that kind of messes up everything.
Well, absolutely. No, I would agree because digital information is the new currency. Everybody, is represented by their online footprint, their digital footprint, and information gets exchanged all around. So, even if you don't want to, the only thing standing between you and getting your information completely private is a tinfoil hat. Unfortunately.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, leveraging cybersecurity for business growth. That is one of the biggest issues now for companies is how not to get hacked.
hmm Well, not just how not to get hacked, like, but think about it purely from a growth perspective, right? So, as a fellow business owner, I'm sure you'll agree that one of the core things that you need to keep checking the pulse for is how is the growth trajectory looking for your business? What's your pipeline looking like? How is the business going to continue to grow?
Mhm.
And that means making sure that your marketing's on point, making sure that the first impression that you make to a prospect is stellar, because that's the first and only chance you're going to get. And that is where cybersecurity is now becoming an increasingly bigger leverage point. And I always like to give this example. The Apple iPhone is probably one of the best examples of retail marketing done right.
Mhm.
And take a look at their last 5 campaigns that they've run as part of the new iPhone model launch. Yes, they talk about they've got 3 cameras and not two, and whatever. Let's put that aside. But one of the core recurring themes over the last 5 years has been privacy and trust. It's
Yes.
about, right, and that is what drives people to buy. Before then, it was because Apple products just work, so that was the big messaging point. Now it's not just that Apple products just work, it's because Apple products are safe. The company makes it a big priority to keep data safe, so they're using marketing, and they're using cybersecurity and trust as a leverage point. Let's bring it back to what we're talking about, which is as a business that's positioning itself to prospects. If you have a pre-thought out narrative on how you maintain, the safety of people's information, of your business's confidential and commercially sensitive information, you're already making that positive impression when you first speak to them, rather than being subject to their due diligence exercise. It's kind of like thinking 2 steps ahead. They're going to ask me this question, so I actually have the narrative prepared.
Mm. Okay. And yeah, I mean, most companies, especially smaller businesses, don't think about that.
Most businesses, especially as businesses evolve, the first is it's almost like, and once again, this is based on my very limited experience, and I'll defer to yours because you have so much more experience than I in this field. That firstly, it's always about, I'm going to try winning on price. I'm going to try winning on, making my bid the most competitive. The second is, I'm going to win by personality. So most founders are, for the first 3, 4 years of their business, all of that marketing is really the personality of the business owner. That's what gets people to buy, because people buy from people.
Mhm.
But if small businesses start thinking more about, yes, we've got a competitive bid, yes, the founder's got a great story to tell, but underpinning all of that is our stringent focus on trust and privacy and safeguarding your information, just like we safeguard our information. You're building that initial narrative of trust. And that is something which not a lot of people think about, not a lot of people talk about. And with all these hacks that are becoming even more publicized, I think about it this way: for every one news article that you read in the published media, there are about 20 incidents that go unpublished.
Yeah.
So it is happening, and people are being impacted. And sometimes, actually, I would dare say most times, it's not even their own fault. It's because their supplier got hacked, or there's something in their supply chain went, went awry, and that's why that information's out there. So how, I mean, one is the stuff that we're talking about, which is about, putting that, best foot forward, but the other is about the operational side of business, right? On how do you maintain a tight ship. And that has also got to do with how you're vetting everyone that you use within your supply chain, whether you're a consultant, whether you ship digital products or you do physical products or whatever be the case, right? What is your supply chain? Are you even aware? And are you thinking about, basic hygiene of security? Now, admittedly, one of the biggest problems that, and this is what we talk a lot about when we speak about, from a consulting perspective, or that, is to kind of avoid the jargon. And I hope so far everything that I've said has kind of been devoid of the jargon. Um, it's
Yeah.
very easy to go down the technical route and start talking technical gobbledygook just to get people like, "Ooh, this guy seems to know what he's talking about." It's kind of like the paper napkin test. If I cannot convey my ideas on in terms which are as simple as you could write them on a paper napkin, I clearly don't know what I'm talking about.
I have to agree. And one of the things, I've been in the technology field for over 30 years. So I started with the big mainframes and all that kind of stuff. So I definitely know where you're coming from when, and basically I did a lot of support work with users. And you cannot come with people with jargon because they don't, it's like walk, 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 walk to them.
Correct. And it's also about the takeaway, right? So
Yes,
um uh if forget the fact that this is a podcast. We're talking about, this is two people having a conversation.
absolutely.
What and one of the things which I learned very early on as I started my business is, as a communicator, it is my responsibility to be understood,
Yes.
right? It's my responsibility to be understood, not the person receiving the communication. So everything I say, even when it's advice, when it's consulting, whatever be the case, it needs to be clear enough for the takeaway.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. All right. So, how do organizations get a cybersecurity program in their company? What it, because I'm sure it's a lot of people like, well, where do I start?
Sure. Uh, okay, so imagine you had a piece of paper, and what I would say is, I want you to draw 5 circles, uh, all around each other. So you've got a small circle, then you draw a bigger circle around it, and a bigger circle around it, and so on until you get 5. All right. Now let's start labeling these circles, which will make sense in just a moment. Right in the middle, right in the middle is your data. So that could be all your files, all your records from your CRM, from your accounting software, all the data that's in your business, that's right in the middle. Now, around that data, you can't just use that data. You probably use some kind of system. So it could be your CRM, it could be that. So you write systems on the second circle. Then around that, obviously, those systems need to be hosted somewhere, right? They're either hosted on your servers in your office or in a data center, or they are cloud-based software like SaaS, right? So then you write location, or you talk about infrastructure, and then just after that, these things don't work by themselves. You got people, right? So you've got your people. And then just on the outside is people don't work in isolation, people work in groups. So there's ecosystem, which includes your supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
Now that you've got all of these things listed out, then you start right from the bottom, like right from the center, which is how are we protecting our data? How are we protecting the systems that they're on? How are we protecting the devices that those systems are running on or hosted on or accessed by? How are we protecting and informing the people that are using those systems? And how are we protecting the ecosystem in which we operate? When you answer those questions, that is the bare bone high level outline of your cybersecurity program. That's all that it is.
Okay, well, that's simple enough.
Like I wish I could remember who said this, but someone way more smarter than myself said that the problem named is the problem solved. And what we've just done now is we've identified the problems,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for everything on what we've spoken about on these, five concentric circles on how do we protect it, you also ask the question, what are the problems that I currently face? Uh, there's a very knowledgeable and very smart gentleman who currently heads up the our like the Australian version of the Department of Defense.
Mm-hmm.
His name's Mike Burgess, and he talked about the five no's of security. Five KNOWS,
Mm-hmm.
and they are: do you know where your data is? Do you know what your data is? Do you know where it is? Do you know who has access to it? Do you know where it is hosted? And do you know whether the entities and people responsible for protecting it are actually doing their job?
Yes, and I have to agree with you. And that's one of the first questions that I ask, being in the IT field for so many years. That's one of the first questions that I ask is, what's your security protocol for this data, especially if it involves names, addresses, accounts, things like that. I need to know that.
I agree. And this is where a couple of so this is where we're starting to veer into the direction of the work that I do, that my team and I do on a day-to-day basis, which is around the compliance of security.
Hmm.
And one of the things that is becoming very popular very rapidly is asking companies for a SOC 2 attestation and a SOC 2 report. So the SOC 2, for those who don't know, is the cybersecurity standard that's maintained and published by the AICPA, which is the American Institute of Chartered Professional Accountants. Why
Hmm.
accountants? Because accountants are very thorough and they've come up with multiple auditing standards. And SOC 2 is the one that's used for cybersecurity. And it's made up of five core criteria that organizations can elect to be audited on. There's only one that's important, like there's only one that's mandatory, which is security, actually two, security and confidentiality. And then you've got others as well. But by asking organizations that, hey, do you have a SOC 2 report that we could read? It'll give you an independent assessment on their security program. Now, admittedly, it's not something that a small organization might undertake, because these things aren't cheap.
Hmm.
Getting an audit done is and it's not only just about money; it's also about the effort, right? But then, unfortunately, one of the things that often happens in our world is compliance tends to very quickly slide into bureaucracy, and you've
Yes.
got these huge questionnaires that are a pain to fill out and
Mhm.
an even bigger pain to read. So there are a couple of different ways that you could go about it. Like, for example, let's suppose that you and I were having a initial business consultation, and you were assessing me on whether you wanted to take my services and you had questions about security. So a quick way would be tell us a little bit about your environment. Do you use AWS? Do you use Azure? Do you use Google Cloud? Do you use Microsoft 365 or do you use Google Workspaces? Tell us a bit about your infrastructure. So, by actually being able to at least quantify a little bit of how the organization operates, even if they don't have a cybersecurity program or a cybersecurity compliance program in place, by at least asking these questions, you're starting to narrow down the potential vectors of compromise that could exist. So, uh, and I will apologize in advance. I'm going to use a couple of technical terms and I will go slightly technical, but Ida, please feel free to pull me back if I get too technical on you, right? So, so let's say, I tell you that we use AWS. So one of the questions that you could ask me would be, all right, so what are the different, products within the AWS ecosystem that you're using? Are you using something which is called the Simple Storage Service, or S3 for short? Um, are you using the S3 service? Are you using AWS S3? How is that data secured? Have you set up the appropriate access permissions on those S3 buckets? That really narrows down the focus of what we're looking at, right? And I've given you a very pointed, very specific example, but what I'm trying to allude to here is by starting to quantify the environment of the potential supplier or service that you're working with, you're starting to narrow down and focus on the things that you should be asking. Now, there's some really good material out there which is available at no cost. For example, the Cloud Security Alliance has a set of questions that you could ask any organization that's providing a SaaS offering to you. If you're using a cloud service provider like a platform as a service or something like that, there's a criteria that you can use as well. And getting them to fill that out really is getting them to, um, you know, really quantify the environment. So those are some of the things that you can look at right now. Different industries have started building out specific I would say, specific standards or baselines of security that need to be, in place. For example, within the Australian market, for example, there is, and especially if you work in education, there is a standard called Safe for Schools. I think that's what it is. But it is solutions that are pre-vetted against a criteria that, yep, these are okay to be used in schools. And I'm pretty sure there's similar baselines that, different federal and state agencies or organizations that work at those two levels would have. So there's a lot of stuff available, but you just got to be able to first make that onion that I talked about,
Mm-hmm.
and then also apply it to the people that you work with, because that's ecosystem. That's right. That's right on the outset. So we could have a great, our house could be clean, but if the street isn't clean, and if the people that we allow into our house, so to speak, aren't really following hygiene, then we are introducing risk into our environment.
Yes.
So I often link cybersecurity to two analogies. One is hygiene and one is fitness. These have been done to death, so I wish I could take the credit, but I can't. These have been used in the past. So it's about personal hygiene and it's about fitness. So you got to get into a regimen. You got to get into good habits, and
Mm-hmm.
that is what cybersecurity is. I wish I could say that, as you notice, I'm not wearing the stereotypical hoodie that people often associate with people from my industry. But what we do is quite boring. And when I say boring, boring is good. Boring is dependable. Boring means that it is not to be deviated, because if you follow a good regimen, um, it is what it is. It starts becoming predictable. When it becomes predictable, it becomes reliable, and when it becomes reliable, it becomes consistent, and so on and so forth. You get the picture.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So if companies want to seek your services, how do they connect with you?
Oh, very straightforward. We've tried to make that experience quite straightforward. You go to our website, all of our services, all of our pricing, everything's online. Our website's it's cybermatters.io, and you can just go to the website. We've tried to make the website as non-cyber as possible, only because We're currently going through a refresh of the website, so I'm hoping our new version of the website will be released probably mid of September, I believe.
Mhm.
Um, so the whole experience is quite straightforward. Go to the website, everything's offered as a package or a retainer. Fill out the questionnaire, and someone from our team will be in touch to discuss specifically what you're after.
Yes, yes, because this is so important that companies start to think about this because making sure that they asking these questions to people that vendors that they're inviting into their space. That this is important because I mean being in the IT field, I automatically ask, because I mean I remember like the cloud right now. The cloud is just a whole bunch of computers in a
Yeah,
room,
it's
maintained,
somebody else's server. That's what
right,
it
on
is.
somebody else's server. Back in the day, we housed our own servers in-house. So, with that being said, you kind of knew you have people working on every facet of that server and monitoring different things. But by things going to the cloud, you don't know what they're doing.
Hmm. And actually, that's a really interesting point. And I want to highlight something here. Just because AWS has SOC 2 reports and all different security certifications, as does Azure and as does Google Cloud, doesn't necessarily mean that they're secure only because of something called the shared security responsibility model. So what that means is when you start using these services, when it comes to security, all of these different service providers promise you a certain level of security at a certain point.
Yeah,
Uh, for example, they guarantee that the data centers that they host all their servers and hardware, and those will follow strict protocols for security. They will provide all of the services that you use, and those underlying services will be secure. However, configuration, ongoing monitoring, actioning on the logs or the alerts that come out of the monitoring sit squarely with the user, not with the service provider.
right.
So that means there is a certain amount of responsibility. And I think one of the best ways that this has been explained has been by the folks at Google with Google Cloud, where they don't call it shared responsibility, they call it shared fate. And I really like that concept because it is an intertwined responsibility.
Mm.
Both service provider and service user are kind of working hand in hand to facilitate a certain outcome through a service, through whatever SaaS that's being offered. So just because you're in the cloud doesn't necessarily mean that you're secure, because by default a lot of these services do not have security built in, so you actually have to make that effort. So
Yes, absolutely. And in my field, that was one of the things I did, monitor the health of the whole data center.
mm-hmm,
So if something happened, I had to respond very quickly. And if I needed to escalate, I needed to do that. So I get it.
mm-hmm,
We
yeah,
get it. And if something went wrong, that was a report. Why did it go wrong? What you gonna do about this next time? You have
mm-hmm,
a big report. So in order to avoid that report, you was paying attention to what
mm-hmm,
was going on because you didn't want that extra work of having to create, a report because it did go wrong. And then in the money industry, those that's a huge thing. Banks
mm-hmm.
and you know companies that deal with large amounts of money. That,
Absolutely. And on that, I'll also say this, that you mentioned at the start of our conversation that all of our information's out there, and there's a lot of there's a certain amount of baseline expectation that one has to work with or operate with, that this is probably out there, and some form of your ID, some form of your contact information exists.
yes.
Probably the reason why you get so much spam as well. That being said, if organizations start focusing on response time rather than just focusing on preventative measures solely, that is also important
Yeah.
because there there are so many variables, right? I can't think of another example, but you know how Rumsfeld was famous for saying known knowns and unknown unknowns, right? There are a lot of variables that you just cannot factor for, or even if you can, they're just not in your control.
Right.
So what is then the way forward? The way forward is to actually have a plan. And I want to take an example which is very relevant, especially for smaller businesses. So, one of the biggest cybersecurity related threats that any small business experiences is what's called business email compromise and paying fraudulent invoices that come through where your suppliers could have been compromised and the invoice that you get has bank details changed. So you end up, paying a legitimate invoice, but just into a different account, which is not, belonging to the supplier. Therefore, being able to respond to those things very quickly is more important than trying to prevent them because they will occur.
Yeah.
Uh, if anyone says that they've got a silver bullet to prevent this from happening, probably
They
selling you
don't.
some snake oil. Yeah,
They
some
don't.
snake oil that they're trying to sling. Uh, so and the other thing that also, like, just as a follow-up to this, a lot of the times organizations start to feel overwhelmed when they think, oh, how are we going to respond to this? Think about switching all this digital information with actual, like, just take a bricks and mortar analogy to kind of help guide you. If somebody came in and mailed you an invoice which had someone's bank details on it, you wouldn't just go ahead and pay it. You'd
Right.
call them and say, hey, I've received this invoice, I just want to confirm some details, right? This is the amount, this is your bank details, this is your company registration number, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So why wouldn't you do it when you get it in the form of an email, or when someone sends you a payment link, right? So, and the steps that you need to document don't need to be very verbose. They could just be 4 bullet points. Call
Mhm.
the supplier, confirm the details,
Yes.
double check with the bookkeeper, and send the payment for approval. And then the payment process is, once you get the payment request as the person who pays out all the bills, uh, confirm with the person who sent you the invoice that, yep, this is correct. Make sure that the person's bank details actually match up with the invoice, and then pay them, and then confirm that they received payment.
Yes. And that's what I do. I get stuff from Amazon. You owe, your whatever for $4,000. First of all, I already know I ain't spend that.
Mm-hmm.
That, you gotta like keep it real. You know what you buy. So if you
Mm-hmm.
get an email saying you bought such and such a thing for X amount of dollars, you know you need to check that out because you know that's not real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And actually, going back to the point that I made about boring, consistent, reliable, the reason why it needs to be boring, consistent, reliable is that it becomes predictable.
Mm-hmm.
So you know that your monthly outgoings are X. You know that your monthly incoming is Y.
Yes.
And whenever those two figures don't look like what they're supposed to, then that's where you go ahead and investigate,
Yes.
right? We're very good with, generally, most people are very good with watching where their money comes from and where it goes. If we start taking the same diligence and approach to the information that we send and receive, a lot of these, breaches or unauthorized access to information can be prevented.
Oh
So,
yeah.
it's once again comes back to hygiene, comes back to doing the boring stuff. It's almost like who wants to eat asparagus and broccoli because it's boring? Well, you need that fiber in your body, right? And for everyone who's hearing us who's post 35, God, you know that you need that fiber.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about AI
Mm-hmm.
and security
Sure. Okay.
because I don't think a lot of people are doing the AI stuff, you know, at some level and not thinking security at all.
They're not. So once again, I don't know who to attribute this to, but if you don't have to pay for a service, guess what? You're the product. I don't know, something to that effect, right? So all of the leading generative AI platforms offer a very uh, appealing product for free. If you go to OpenAI, their GPT-4 Mini, 4o Mini, or Mini O4, whatever it is
Mhm.
available for free on the website. So you can go and start using it right away. Where do you think all of that data that you feed it is going to? It's going to training their models. And it's kind of like, once it's in there, it's in there.
Right.
So a lot of the biggest threats that come out from generative AI, uh, obviously the stuff that's being generated is, amazing, and you can't differentiate it from what a human would do and things like
Mhm.
that. We'll get in that in just a second. But it's more about what are people putting in. For example, one of the biggest concerns, and it was reported on fairly well, was in 2023, a significant part of the software code from Samsung in Korea was added unwittingly by its developers into ChatGPT to kind of get feedback on how they could code things better. Now,
Uh,
guess what? That source code is not part of the training data, and you have zero access to it. No one outside of OpenAI knows what that training data looks like because that isn't available to the public to see. So it is problematic, right? So similarly, what if let's say you were a bookkeeper and you had 600 entries that you had to code properly. You put it into ChatGPT or Claude or any of the new tools that are out there, and you say, "Hey, read all this information and categorize it and spit out a table that I could just paste into Excel, and my bookkeeping stuff is done." Right? And you
right.
can do it in you can do it in about, like, 4 or 5 minutes. But what you're doing is you're starting to enter all of that information into training data. So that is a concern. Uh, but look, let's be real. As a species, we will always prioritize convenience over security,
Yes.
right? So
We
if I
will.
were to say, yeah, well, it's human nature. It's human nature. Uh, and like, I'll give you the classic example. I've got a phone with a fantastic camera, and it's a lot easier to hold and use this phone than to actually open my laptop and then get on the Zoom call. So I'm on the phone with you. So I will prioritize convenience over any other thing. And I'm like most people, and most people think like that. However, just like we were speaking about attacks before, that you need to work with the provision that yes, you will be a subject of a data breach or something at some point in time. So it's about how quickly you respond. Just like that, we need to be proactive and think about this. People will use OpenAI and similar tools, generative AI tools. So if you set guidelines on how to use it in a way that's responsible, in a way that doesn't undermine any of your proprietary information, you aren't saying no, but you're also saying, yep, if you want to play, this is the way to play. We're
Mhm.
not saying don't play the game, but these are the rules.
Right.
And what are those rules? First of all, don't put any customer information in there. That's one.
Mhm.
Two, if you're going to be referring to, if you need to reference, let's say you were running Acme widgets. Let's say your company was called Acme Widgets. Don't put in Acme Widgets, but just say a widget manufacturer.
Okay.
So put in a descriptor of the company rather than the company name itself. Um, don't upload oodles of information, because most of these Gen AI platforms now allow you to upload files and videos and photos and whatnot. So don't fall into that trap.
Mhm.
If you want to go down that route, if you want to go down that route, use a Gen AI platform that allows for what's called data sandboxing. And what that means is whatever you upload is only used for that particular purpose, and then it's like, torn down. Or it's only used for that and is not merged into the training data that's used as part of that Gen AI platform. I mean, if you had to, but where you've got a lot of where you've got all these, cloud hosted Gen AI services, you do have models which you can run locally on your laptop or on your, on your desktop. And a lot of these newer models don't require you to have like crazy graphics cards or processing power. Most of them can run on a modern laptop or desktop. So if you really did want to start using it for those purposes, run a local Gen AI platform. And I can recommend it's an open source software called GPT for All. And what that does is it allows you to run all of these open source models on your local computer.
Yeah.
So if you really wanted to kind of start using your data without having to sanitize it first, use a local LLM. And I'm saying these things based on my own practices. So I do use generative AI for quite a few things, but I use local models like hosted on my laptop or on my desktop rather than uploading and pushing everything into one of these cloud tools.
Yes, and that's how I am. I'm not a real big fan of cloud-based applications. I use the minimum amount of those because I rather run stuff on my laptop or my desktop, and that way I know it's just local to me and
Mm-hmm.
nobody else. Yeah.
Sure. Until the point where you get forced to start using cloud platforms, right? So that's why if it's inevitable, the best way to get ahead is to kind of identify and define the parameters of the way to engage. Rules of engagement need to be defined.
Yes.
Uh, so for organizations which are slightly larger, so 50, 60, 70 employees, we recommend that one of the core policies that you should always have the minute you start hiring people, you need to have an acceptable use of IT policy.
Yeah.
And that kind of defines the rules of engagement on, hey, if you're going to be using a company laptop or a company phone or any company provided IT resources, this is what's acceptable and this is what's not acceptable. And instead of rolling out something like a new AI policy, I recommend adding those do's and don'ts for AI into your acceptable use policy
Mm-hmm.
and making sure if there's one document that everyone needs to read and sign off and acknowledge, it's that policy, the acceptable use, because they are agreeing and getting into a contract with you as the employer that this is how we will use resources that are provided to us by the company.
Yes, and most companies that I've worked for, we did have that because people have laptops, page back then it was pages, and then it was the iPhones, all that kind of stuff. So
You're
yeah,
forgetting the Blackberries.
oh, Blackberries. I fixed a many a Blackberry, so I know what you're talking about. Yes, I mean, I've been having to work with those type of stuff pretty much all my life. It's in my DNA in terms of technology. And most people like you and I don't really pay attention to, aren't like us. We pay attention to what's happening in the background, the stuff that people can't see. We
Mm-hmm,
care about that for sure. When
mm-hmm,
I run
mm-hmm,
a software package, or I'm evaluating a package, I'm paying attention to every prompt. And that's one
mm-hmm,
of the things with the newer software, everything is like a little bar going across. Back in
mm-hmm.
the day, you actually saw code where this is happening, that is happening. Now they give you what the progress bar, which I'm not that crazy about, but I want to see what's happening.
No, fair enough. Absolutely, absolutely. Um, Once again, a lot of this stuff is inevitable. So the best way to get ahead is to kind of define the rules for how it's going to go ahead, and what you as an employer, as a company, are willing to stand and not willing to stand for. So
Yeah.
that way, you're setting the narrative at least that this is the way it's going to be.
And you help companies set that up. You help
Absolutely.
that. Good.
So within like so about so what we do is I would kind of break it down into three areas. The first is governance, risk, and compliance advisory. So we help define security programs, how they will run, and actually run them as well for clients that that don't have the resources and in house. The second area is what we call assurance, where we will test your software applications, which you're, if you run a SaaS or if you run any kind of public infrastructure in the cloud, we'll test it for you through what's called pen testing. And then third is education, where we look at building and running awareness programs and education programs for general staff, for specific groups. Like one of the biggest groups that we often work with are executive assistants or executive operations, where the group of people that have access to everything and are kind of like the glue that makes everything work together. And then that also includes running awareness programs for directors, for boards, and so on. So those are the three things we do. Cybersecurity is a huge field with a lot of other things. I wish we did more, but hey, stick to what you know. We've been doing this for a long time. And yeah, so, we do these three things and we'd like to think we do them really well.
Absolutely. So again, how do companies contact you?
So just our website, it's cybermatters.io. It's got a big contact us page, and they can fill out their details, and generally everything that we do is quite clearly articulated on the website. So just go to our website, and just get in touch.
All righty now. Well, I am so happy that you joined us today because this needs to be talked about. I think you're my first true cybersecurity guest. So that gets into supporting companies to come up with a plan because we all see it in the news. We've all touched. All of our information is out there.
Mm-hmm.
Whether
No, no, I truly appreciate the opportunity as well, Ida. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yes, thank you.